Hello, folks, and welcome back to Boss Economics World, the only channel that puts on its hip waders and trudges through the swamp of central bank doublespeak so you don't have to. Today, we have a real gem. A masterpiece of tranquilizing rhetoric straight from the hallowed halls of the European Central Bank in Frankfurt. It's September 25, 2025, and Executive Board member Piero Cipollone has graced us with a vision of such perfect, placid equilibrium that you'd think he was describing a Zen garden, not the sputtering, fractured, and deeply precarious 20-nation economic bloc known as the Eurozone. Let's roll the tape on this beautiful piece of fiction. Cipollone told Bloomberg, and I quote, "The risks to inflation are very balanced. The economy? Oh, it's been quite resilient. And the ECB's current policy position? My friends, we are in a good place. A good place. Let that sink in. A good place. Are we talking about the Eurozone economy, or a five-star Tuscan retreat where the Prosecco flows freely and the only headwind is a gentle breeze from the Mediterranean? Because from where I'm sitting, calling the 2025 European economy a good place is like calling a controlled demolition structural realignment. It's technically true, but it misses the explosive reality of the situation entirely. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the grand illusion of modern central banking. The performance art of reassurance. Today, we're going to do what Mr. Cipollone and his colleagues pray you won't. We're going to peel back the curtain. We'll go from the single point, this ludicrously optimistic statement, to the vast, unstable surface of the European economy it's trying to wallpaper over. So grab your coffee, because class is in session. Let's start with the central dogma of this sermon, the 2% inflation target. Cipollone says, we are right on target. We will be close to target for the next 2 years. He highlights that inflation expectations are consistently nailed to around 2%, calling this reassuring. Reassuring? It's terrifying. Why? Because achieving a 2% inflation rate in late 2025 is not a sign of a healthy, vibrant economy. It's the sign of a patient whose fever has broken, but who is now suffering from hypothermia and severe internal bleeding. The ECB, in its infinite wisdom, spent 2022 and 2023 hiking rates at the most aggressive pace in its history, from negative territory all the way up to a restrictive 4% and then settling down to the current 2% deposit rate. They slammed the monetary brakes to tame the post-pandemic, post-invasion inflation beast. And it worked. They killed the fever. But what did they kill in the process? Let's look at the data they're conveniently not shouting from the rooftops. The German engine has seized. Cipollone claims Europe is resilient. Let's talk about Germany. As of Q3 2025, the so-called locomotive of Europe is running on fumes. The deindustrialization that analysts warned about in 2023 has become a brutal reality. The IFO Business Climate Index has been languishing in pessimistic territory for 18 straight months. Why? The triple whammy. 1. Energy costs. Europe never fully solved the structural energy deficit created by cutting off cheap Russian gas. While prices aren't at their 2022 peaks, German industrial electricity prices are still 40 to 50% higher than in the US and a staggering 100 to 120% higher than in China. Giants like BASF, after announcing massive layoffs and a permanent adaptation in 2023, have now shifted a significant chunk of their high-value chemical production to Guangdong and Louisiana. 2. Chinese competition. The German automotive sector is in a state of managed decline. In 2025, Chinese brands like BYD, NIO, and XPeng now command nearly 25% of the European EV market share, up from less than 10% in 2023. They aren't just cheaper, they've leapfrogged the German giants on software and in-car technology. The Vorsprung durch Technik is now a marketing slogan for a bygone era. 3. The U.S. Inflation Reduction Act, this masterstroke of American industrial policy, initiated back in the Biden era, continues to siphon green tech investment out of Europe. Billions in planned battery gigafactories and green hydrogen projects that were slated for Saxony and Bavaria have been rerouted to Ohio and Georgia, chasing massive subsidies the fragmented EU fiscal system simply cannot match. So, when Mr. Cipollone says the economy is resilient, he's ignoring the fact that its core engine is spewing smoke and losing horsepower. The 2% inflation is, in part, a direct consequence of this anemic industrial demand. It's not a victory, it's a symptom of managed decline. Now, let's dissect the quality of this 2% inflation. It's not all created equal. The ECB is celebrating a headline number, but the internals tell a story of deep societal and economic division. This is the tale of two Europes, hidden within a single, misleading statistic. On one side, you have the North, Germany, the Netherlands, Austria. Here, the 2% inflation is a reflection of stagnation. Wage growth has been tepid. After the bruising battles of 2023 to 2024, unions have lost their bargaining power. German real wages, after accounting for this tame inflation, have shown a net growth of barely 0.5% over the last 2 years. The savings rate among middle-class German households has ticked up, not because they are prosperous, but because they are fearful. They see the writing on the wall for their manufacturing jobs. This isn't healthy disinflation, it's the quiet before the storm. On the other side, you have the South, Italy, Spain, Greece, Portugal. Here, the story is different. The post-pandemic tourism boom continued strong into 2024 and 2025, creating hotspots of service sector inflation. In these countries, the core services inflation is still running closer to 3.5 to 4%. So, the balanced 2% average is a mathematical fiction, masking persistent inflationary pressures in the south and borderline deflationary stagnation in the north. This creates an impossible dilemma for the ECB. Their one-size-fits-all monetary policy is simultaneously too loose for Milan and too tight for Munich. And what about the average European citizen? Does this 2% inflation feel like a good place? Go to a Carrefour in Paris or a Lidl in Berlin. The price of a basket of essential groceries is still 25 to 30% higher than it was in 2021. The rate of increase has slowed, but the accumulated price level is a permanent scar on household budgets. The ECB celebrating 2% inflation is like a mugger telling you to be grateful he's now only taking 2% of your remaining money each year after having taken 15% in the 2 years prior. It's an insult to the intelligence of ordinary people. The resilience Cipollone speaks of is the resilience of the wealthy. Asset prices, from Milanese real estate to LVMH stock, have performed beautifully, propped up by the expectation that the ECB will have to pivot to rate cuts the moment the economy truly cracks. It's the K-shaped reality we've been talking about on this channel for years, a paradise for asset owners, a purgatory for wage earners. This is where the commentary becomes truly absurd. Cipollone mentions headwinds from higher US tariffs as a primary source of uncertainty. A headwind? My friends, that's not a headwind. That is a Category 5 geopolitical hurricane, and the ECB is acting like a cruise director assuring passengers that the slight rocking is just for atmospheric effect. The prompt notes that policymakers will get new projections in December to assess Donald Trump's levies. Let's be blunt about what a Trump 2.0 presidency, which began in January 2025, actually entails for Europe. It's not just a few targeted tariffs. We are now 9 months into it, and the strategy is clear. 1. The universal 10% baseline tariff. This isn't a negotiating tactic, it's a reality. Every single good entering the US from Europe now faces this levy. For the export-dependent German car industry, which was already on its knees, this is a death blow. A Porsche 911 or a Mercedes S-Class is now 10% more expensive in its most profitable market. 2. The weaponization of NATO. The constant threats to withdraw from NATO or invoke Article 5 selectively have forced European nations into a panic-driven military spending spree. Germany's Zeitenwende fund has been exhausted, and now there are calls for new, pan-European debt to fund defense. This is profoundly inflationary and diverts capital from productive investment into non-productive military hardware. It also creates massive fiscal strain, especially for countries already drowning in debt. 3. The secondary sanctions threat. The US is increasingly using the dollar's global reserve status as a weapon against China. European banks and corporations, like Deutsche Bank or Siemens, are being forced to choose, do business with China and risk being cut off from the US financial system, or abandon the world's second-largest market. Europe is being systematically squeezed between an isolationist, protectionist America and an assertive, expansionist China. Its entire post-Cold War economic model, exporting high-value goods to the world under the umbrella of US security, is dead. In this context, for an ECB board member to talk about balanced risks and being in a good place is a dereliction of duty. He is the lookout on the Titanic, remarking on the crispness of the night air while ignoring the gargantuan iceberg dead ahead. The lots of information they will assess in December is just a euphemism for we're waiting to see how big the hole in the side of the ship is before we tell the passengers. This brings me to the most revealing and hollow line in the entire statement. Cipollone concludes, we are ready to react, whatever is needed, in any direction. Oh, really? Let's game this out. Scenario A, the economy tips into a deep recession. The German industrial crisis deepens, unemployment spikes. The obvious reaction is to cut interest rates to stimulate demand. But wait. The moment they do that, they risk two things. First, reigniting service sector inflation in the South. Second, and more terrifyingly, causing a collapse in the euro. With the Fed in the US likely holding rates higher for longer to fund its massive deficits, a rate cut from the ECB would send the euro to US dollar exchange rate plummeting, which in turn imports inflation via higher energy and commodity prices. Checkmate. Scenario B, a new inflationary shock hits. Let's say the geopolitical situation deteriorates further. China blockades Taiwan, or the conflict in the Middle East explodes, sending oil to $150 a barrel. This supply-side shock would send inflation soaring again. The textbook reaction is to hike interest rates to crush demand. But if they do that, with the economy already so fragile, they risk something far worse, a sovereign debt crisis. Remember Italy? Its debt-to-GDP ratio is currently hovering around 140%. At the ECB's current 2% deposit rate, this is barely manageable, thanks in large part to the ECB's own bond-buying backstops like the transmission protection instrument. If they were forced to hike rates back to 4% or 5% to fight a new inflation wave, Italian bond yields would explode. The spread between German and Italian bonds would blow out, and we'd be right back in the 2012 whatever-it-takes crisis. But this time, their credibility is shot, and their balance sheet is already bloated. Checkmate again. They are trapped. The tools they have are designed for a 20th century economy of cyclical demand shocks. They are utterly unequipped for the 21st century economy of geopolitical fragmentation, supply-side weaponization, and structural decline. Their calm, reassuring language is not a reflection of reality. It's their only remaining policy tool. When your models are broken and your instruments are ineffective, all you have left is narrative management. Their job is no longer to steer the economy, it's to convince the markets that they still have their hands on the wheel, even as the ship is being tossed by a tidal wave. Cipolloni's statement isn't an economic analysis, it's a prayer whispered into a microphone, hoping that if they say we're in a good place enough times, it might magically become true. So, what's the takeaway for you, the intelligent investor, the concerned citizen? Ignore the lullabies. Look at the data they hide. Look at the geopolitical chessboard they downplay. Understand that the era of central bank omnipotence is over. They are no longer masters of the universe, they are managers of a very elegant, very fragile, and very combustible decline. The risks are not balanced. They are skewed catastrophically to the downside. The resilience is a facade. And the good place they're in is the eye of the storm. Stay sharp, stay skeptical, and for the love of God, don't believe the hype.